but to retain public confidence, the European Convention on Human Rights and other instruments must evolve to face modern challenges. Domestically, we will clarify how convention rights operate in immigration cases, and I'm engaging across Europe on wider reform.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Lord Chancellor for that answer. Clearly, the public are frustrated by the fact that foreign criminals are not deported, and that people that come here illegally are not deported, and that human rights laws are used to prevent that from happening. I understand that his predecessor, the Home Secretary, now is considering changes to the laws that may happen. But I wonder if that is the case, could he not actually take my right honourable friend, the Shadow Lord Chancellor's bill, and put that into law so we can actually get on with the job of deporting people that shouldn't be here?
Yeah. So say.
Well, the right honourable gentleman is right. People are claiming Article 8 right, particularly, and using domestic law to thwart removal to their countries, and that's right. And that's why it's important that we deal with that domestically and come forward with legislation to deal with that. But I do remind him that this government is deporting more foreign criminals than ever before, over 5,000 just in our first year in office. We are taking this seriously and we're acting.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because of our proud history and our commitment to the rule of law, the UK is a global leader on legal services, with our courts garnering respect across the world. What does the Minister think the impact would be on our reputation should we begin ripping up our international agreements and our commitments to the very rule of law that we as a nation helped shape?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, because he's right to remind the House that legal services, the rule of law, the importance of this jurisdiction for companies and individuals seeking recourse actually brings £47 billion a year into our economy. And that's right, it's right we seek common course with countries who are exercises we are like Denmark and Italy on how the European Convention of Human Rights is being thwarted. But we do that in a steady, progressive way, and we certainly recognise the importance of the ECHR.
Father of the House, Edward Lee.
I serve on the Council of Europe, and it's a perfectly worthwhile assembly, and the convention framed, shortly after the Second World War was designed to counter Nazism, frankly. It wasn't designed to protect illegal migrants into a country. Now, we all know that this crisis is sapping belief in government. Why doesn't the very reasonable Justice Secretary work with the even more reasonable Shadow Justice Secretary and come before the House and say that we will get a temporary derogation from the Refugee Convention, the Convention of Human Rights, and that we will detain and deport anybody who enters this country illegally and will solve the crisis?
No, sir.
Well, I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman is hugely experienced. He will know that it's important that we don't do anything, for example, that might undermine the Good Friday Agreement, where the ECHR is fundamental and important. He rightly mentions the Refugee Convention. That sits with the United Nations. I will be going to Strasbourg shortly, where I'll be taking up many of these issues.
Whereas, Mr. Speaker, there are perhaps other unforeseen consequences of leaving the ECHR, including on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. Does the Minister agree with me that opposition parties wishing to leave the ECHR either haven't considered the impacts of leaving on Cornish national minority status, or they have but just don't care about the Cornish?
So stay.
Well, he will know that there were promises made in relation to the debate that we had on exiting the European Union, and all sorts of things were promised by many colleagues opposite, and they were not delivered. And it feels a little bit like we're on repeat in relation to this. There are areas of immigration where we do have to do things domestically. There are areas where we want to work with European colleagues who also are concerned at the way that laws are being thwarted. But please let us not undermine a fundamental that was actually instituted by one of the heroes of this Parliament, Winston Churchill.
Shadow Secretary of State Robert Gemry.
Mr. Speaker, Fawad Awale is an extremist and double murderer who later took a prison officer hostage and demanded the release of the radical cleric Abu Qatada. He is the definition of evil. And yet, the Justice Secretary's department is now set to pay him compensation, as his ECHR rights have apparently been infringed because he couldn't associate with monsters like those who killed Lee Rigby. Will the Justice Secretary ensure that not a single penny of taxpayers' money is handed over to this man? And if he won't, and he puts our membership of the ECHR above the interests of the British people, will he put his money where his mouth is and pay any so-called compensation himself?
Secretary of State.
I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman is always keen to get headlines, but he knows that the consequences of judgments and what then impacts on government and any payments made have been an issue for successive governments for the entire time that he and I have been on the planet. He knows that we're committed to the ECHR, offering asylum to those who genuinely are fleeing torture and execution. But he knows too that on the issues that I referred to earlier, Article 8 particularly, and what we can do domestically, and how we can work with European colleagues, we are seeking to do that. So this is not the time to start revising decisions that have effectively been made by our courts.
Mr Roberts.
Question number 2.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In line with HMPPS Welsh language scheme, HMPPS offers prisoners, people on probation and members of the public the right to choose whether to use English or Welsh in their dealings with us. We recognise that enabling the prisoners to use their preferred language is a matter of good practice, not a concession, recognising that prisoners can express their views and needs better in their preferred language.
The Welsh Language Act of 1993 places a duty on public bodies to treat English and Welsh languages as equal in Wales. The Minister mentions the HMPPS Welsh Language Scheme, which there is a new scheme, and it commits to publishing an annual report on its progress. I've already contacted the Ministry of Justice about this and about adherence to the Act. However, considering that the previous iteration of the scheme failed in this respect, publishing only a single report, and that only following a complaint under the 1993 Act, what assurances can he give that the new scheme will have any real effect?
Minister.
I thank the member for her vital question. It's absolutely right that I'll follow up on the correspondence that she sent to the Ministry of Justice. I haven't seen that myself, Mr. Speaker. As I set out before, the policy that the Ministry of Justice implements is one that values the Welsh language and will continue to do that.
Ian Solomon.
Number 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
We're determined to back our hard-working probation staff by investing up to £700 million by the final year of the spending review and investing an initial £8 million in new technology to reduce administrative burdens. We'll also recruit 1,300 trainee probation officers in 2025-6, in addition to more than 1,000 that we recruited last year.
Ian Solomon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July 2024, inspectors rated Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Probation Service inadequate, with major leadership failures and child safeguarding assessed as adequate in just 28% of cases. The action plan committed to increasing probation officer staffing by 87% by March 2026, but the National Audit Office has now revealed that the probation service has underestimated staffing requirements by 34%. Which implies that the service in Cambridgeshire has been operating at only half the staff needed. So, given that miscalculation, will the Secretary of State commit to revised, accurate staffing targets for Cambridgeshire and reassure my constituents that child safeguarding will not be compromised as the service tries to manage with inadequate resources?
State.
Well, Cambridgeshire is a part of the country I know well. I spent 7 years of my life in Peterborough. I will look closely at the issue, and I'll ask the Prisons Minister to meet with him to discuss how we move forward.
Catherine Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Probation Service plays a vital role in our justice system and is integral to ensuring that community sentences are effective and our communities are kept safe. The Conservatives' part privatisation reforms were disastrous for our probation service. What is this government doing to ensure that our probation officers are properly supported in carrying out their vital jobs?
State.
Well, my honourable friend is exactly right. The decisions that were made under the last government by the then Justice Secretary, Chris Grayling, were catastrophic for a wonderful, wonderful service. And we're now in the business of rebuilding the probation service. And I've been very, very pleased to visit probation workers in Kent, in Chatham recently, and in Islington recently. And one of the things that they're raising is their caseload. In Kent, they were trialling our transformation fund money that is introducing AI that can help them do what they want to do, which is face-to-face, and reduce those caseloads. And I want to see that rolled out across the country.
So, Secretary of State Robert Jemmy.
Thank you. Currently, if a child sex offender is released from prison, the police and probation service can track them on the sex offender register. But if a child abuser is released from prison, the authorities have no register to track them with. There's a glaring gap in the system. Paula Hudgell has been fighting to fix the law after her adopted son Tony was abused so badly he lost his legs. She's been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she says this campaign is the fire in her belly. Paula is truly inspirational. We're backing her campaign. Will the Secretary of State take our amendment or bring forward his own and get this change over the line for Paula, for Tony, and to protect children now and into the future?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for raising this issue. I can tell him that the Minister for Victims met with Paula today, and we are keen to support her campaign.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Jess Bramford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like much of the justice system, the probation service is buckling under the strain after a decade of being undervalued by the previous government. So the injection of £700 million by 2028 was welcomed last year, but it's yet to be felt on the front line of probation, which is estimated to be 10,000 staff members short. And with the sentencing bill and a presumption against short sentences bound to put additional pressure on the probation service, what is the Secretary of State doing to ensure that the service can work efficiently to properly manage offenders in the community?
So State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for raising this issue. It was important that we exceeded our target of 1,000 officers last year. We have to get those 1,300 officers in place. The 700 million must be spent by the end of the spending review. I do think it's important that we bear down on getting AI across the service and we introduce that new technology, because it's only by doing that that probation officers can do what they want to do, which is get back to face and that personalised care.
Bradley Thomas.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The sentencing bill will create new powers to apply tougher restrictions on offenders' movements, including the creation of restriction zones and new restrictive licence conditions for probation. This will mean being able to curtail offenders' freedom on licence and measures for the courts to use as requirements on community sentences.
Bradley Thomas.
Mr. Speaker, residents living in villages across North Worcestershire in my constituency of Bromsgrove are often victims of crime which originates from urban areas including Birmingham. What message would the Minister send to my constituents who want a reassurance that the probation service is being strengthened in order that repeat offenders who evade supervision through crossing jurisdiction are not falling through the cracks as a result of lack of police sharing data?
Minister.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member's question. It's absolutely vital that across jurisdiction and across different areas there is better information sharing from probation services and the police. Probation services, as the Justice Secretary has just commented on, is in need of investment. That's why we're investing £750 million, a 45% increase, and we'll continue to invest in our probation service to make sure that his constituents are reassured in the future.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I pay tribute to the hard-working police officers and probation service workers in my constituency of Harlow, which people will be aware is on the Essex-Hertfordshire border, so I recognise some of the issues that the previous speaker has mentioned. Can I ask what work the Minister is doing working with probation services in areas like Harlow that do suffer this problem to address this issue readily and ensure that actually everybody is treated fairly, no matter their geographical location?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right. Our probation service do an outstanding job day in, day out. They are often the hidden heroes of our public services and they deserve great credit.
Ben Maguire.
Question number 5, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Legal aid can be a lifeline and should be available to those who need it wherever they happen to live. This government has made substantial new investment in legal aid, both in criminal legal aid, £92 million additional a year, and also in civil legal aid, where we're investing an additional £20 million a year.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that response. Would the Minister please join me in congratulating Cood solicitors who provide a weekly pro bono surgery to my constituents in Bodmin? Firms like Cood's face, in their own words, so much unnecessary bureaucracy and hoops to jump through when it comes to providing legal aid. I understand the government, as the Minister highlights, some progress has been made towards making the financial investment that's needed in the system, but is she also aware of the incredible burden of this needless bureaucracy, and will she please commit to simplifying public funding contracts?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question and I commend all of those lawyers that provide pro bono support to their clients. It is incredibly commendable. But of course, that ultimately is a sticking plaster and no substitute for a well-functioning legal aid system. That's why, as well as increasing fees, we're also investing in the transformation of the IT digital platform to enable providers to cut through some of that red tape.
In Labour.
Number 6, sir.
Minister.
This government is committed to access to justice, and that involves supporting people from every social background to uphold their rights. As I said earlier, we're investing in civil legal aid. We've introduced the greatest expansion in a decade of legal aid through the Hillsborough Law, and we continue to provide financial support for law centres and citizens' advice so people, wherever they come from, whatever their background, can access legal support.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Labour government's investment in legal aid and legal services is hugely welcome. However, expert analysis show categorically that young people from more deprived backgrounds find it extremely difficult to access justice. Many people from constituencies like mine and Blythe and Ashton are very much unaware of what might be available to them when they're most needed. Can the Minister assure me that everything possible is being done to ensure that our people are acutely aware of what is available to them in order to access the justice they so rightly deserve and in many cases they urgently require?
Minister.
He raises a very important issue. If you don't know your rights, you can't enforce your rights. And so raising awareness is incredibly important. It's important that we expand access to legal support where people are living their lives. So online, the service for Advice Now, where people can access, especially young people, digital legal advice, is a vitally important component of that.
Franklin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm really interested to hear the Minister's answers to the previous question, but true access to justice must include those still imprisoned under legal tests since ruled wrong, including many young people from marginalised communities convicted under joint enterprise. Will the Minister and the Government consider adopting the review mechanism in my sentencing bill amendment, which will create a statutory process for review of convictions so they too can access justice?
Yes. The review of criminal law in that area is something that is incredibly delicate. It's something that we need to look at in line with common law and the case law, and it's something that we're keeping under review.
Alan Morgan.
Number 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Behind the backlogs in our courts, behind each and every one of those case statistics, there is a human story. And there is no doubt that the delays in our criminal courts are taking their toll on victims and all participants
in the criminal justice system. But we are gripping the situation by investing in greater number of Crown Court sitting days, additional investment in criminal legal aid, and of course the review that we've commissioned from Sir Brian Leveson, because what is going to be required is once-in-a-generation reform of our criminal justice system, and we'll be providing our response to that review in due course.
Minister, I think it's grouped. Minister.
It's grouped. Forgive me. Forgive me, Mr. Speaker. I was going to answer both questions 7 and 22 together, and I think you have my answer on the backlogs to that.
Morgan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answer. And the situation she describes is similar to one that I'm about to describe, where a constituent of mine got in touch about a case of historical sexual abuse. They bravely reported that in 2018, and after years of waiting, a trial date was set for this May, only for it to be put back again until July 2027, 9 years after first reporting. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, you can imagine the toll that's taken on my constituents' mental health and well-being. I would urge the Minister to progress at speed with her reform of the court service, and particularly address the problems in Shropshire, where there are significant issues with the Crown Court and Magistrates' Court service.
Minister.
Well, I'm incredibly sorry to hear about your constituents' experience, and I want to reiterate my sympathies. You've articulated there in that case precisely why it is vital that we pursue this reform. Timeliness is an essential ingredient of fairness, and the state's obligation is to deliver fair trials. That's why we will do whatever it takes to bear down on the backlog as we bring forward our response to Sir Brian Leveson's review.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. I've heard from several constituents who are victims of domestic abuse how the delays inherited from the previous government in family court, particularly for financial settlement orders, has compounded the traumatic experience of victims of domestic abuse, including ongoing financial harm and detriment. So could the Minister set out what this government is doing to reduce those delays and in particular support victims of domestic abuse through our court system?
Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question, and we are committed to improving the timeliness, not just in criminal courts, but in family courts as well, and providing better support to victims of domestic abuse, who we know make up many of the participants in that litigation. The Pathfinder model is working. It resolves cases faster, and it offers specialist domestic abuse support. We've expanded the Pathfinder model to 5 additional court areas, and we are continuing that expansion into 2026. He will be happy to know that that includes Hampshire, where I understand his constituency is based.
I could also help with the reopening of Chorley Court, Minister. Jonathan Brash.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary.
It is right that the IPP sentence was abolished. The number of unreleased IPP prisoners fell to 946 as of the 30th of September 2025, which was a reduction of 14% compared to the previous year. Legislative changes were implemented that we implemented have reduced the number of people serving IPP sentences in the community to around 2/3.
Brash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Terry Rowley received an IPP sentence on the 8th of February 2008. His minimum tariff was set at 1 year and 126 days. That was 6,486 days ago, almost 18 years, and he remains in prison. No one disputes the seriousness of his offences, but the issue for Terry and his family is one of equal justice. Someone sentenced to the same crime today would not receive an IPP. So does the Secretary of State accept that this raises fundamental concerns about the fairness and equality before the law for those serving under the IPP regime, and what steps can he take to fix it?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. Can I say that I recognise the challenges that exist for Terry and his family. We are determined to support those in prison to progress towards safe and sustainable releases, but understandably it can't be in a way that undermines public protection. We're not giving up on any individual serving an IPP sentence. We will ensure that each one gets the support and the access to risk education and risk reduction work that they need, and I'll ensure that Terry is receiving all of the support that he needs.
Alexis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the government's assessment of the current protocols regarding the comprehensive risk assessments, and can the public be assured that the existing policies on public protection sentences are effectively safeguarding the community?
Secretary.
Well, that's why we've got to put public protection first. And there has to be a robust risk assessment. We require the parole board to make very sensitive assessments, particularly. People cannot leave prison unless we are confident that they are not going to be going on and committing further crimes. And that's the assessment that we ask the parole board and others in the prison system to make.
Very clearly forward.
Question number 9, please.
Minister.
The government recognises that pension age is an important issue for frontline staff, and I recognise trade unions who represent the views of their members. Officials met with the POA earlier in the autumn to discuss pension age and will continue to engage with them on this important issue.
Marie Kelly Foy.
Speaker, the Prison Officers Association recently launched their 68 is too late pensions report based on the largest members survey in POA history. The report is a heartbreaking read, with prison officers describing how unrealistic and frankly cruel it is to expect them to walk the landings until they're almost 70 years old, and the effect that this has on morale. With 3 prisons in Durham, I often hear support for this important campaign. Does the Minister accept that at the heart of the prison's crisis, there's a crisis in how prison staff are treated by the state, and that by resolving the pensions injustice should be a top priority for any government serious about fixing our jails?
Minister.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend's question, and let me take this opportunity to praise and thank the prison officers who do a remarkable job in often trying and appalling circumstances. As I said previously, the government will continue to engage with the relevant and recognised unions as well as prison officers themselves, and I know the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary is meeting with the POA in the coming days.
Mr. Speaker, given the existing retirement age for prison officers and the increase in the number of violent offenders in prison, along with the increase in illegal substances getting into prison, would you not agree with me that it is time to urgently review that age at which prison officers retire, as many of those older prison officers are looking to retire?
As I've already said, Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely right that we'll continue to have those discussions with the relevant trade unions, but let me be absolutely clear on behalf of the government. We understand that conditions and the work that prison officers do is getting harder, and we are in the business of trying to help them.
Number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supporting victims of child sexual exploitation and abuse is a priority for this government. The Ministry of Justice funds police and crime commissioners across England and Wales, as well as over 60 specialist sexual violence organisations which provide local support services for all victims, including victims of technology-assisted child sexual abuse.
Elsie Blundell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. We all know of the increasing and sinister use of technology when it comes to the appalling sexual abuse of children and young people. To address this, will the Minister consider extending the unduly lenient sentence scheme to include all taxi offences and commit to a ban on these technologies that generate deepfake and sexually abusive images of children?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that important question. Parliament intended the unduly lenient sentencing scheme to be an exceptional power, and any expansion of that scheme must be carefully considered. However, she will be aware that we had a recent debate as the Victims in Courts Bill was on the floor of the House going forward, and I have heard the strength of feeling of this House and campaigners regarding this, and I am looking at it closely.
Calvin Lockhart.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Northern Ireland Police Ombudsman reported that the PSNI's cyber crimes team lacked the capacity and capability to manage the threat posed by prolific online sex offender Alexander McCartney. His abuse led to the tragic death of 12-year-old Samoran Thomas in 2018, and he targeted at least 70 other children. Can the Justice Secretary confirm what steps are being taken to ensure cybercrime teams across all of the UK are properly resourced to deal with online child sexual exploitation?
Well, the whole House will be shocked by that horrific case, and all of our thoughts are with all of the victims of this case. It's an important case which draws attention to the nature and proliferation of these crimes. I know the Safeguarding Minister has spoken to the PSNI regarding this. Through the Online Safety Act, there are powers. However, I know she represents a devolved nation, and it is imperative because these crimes have no borders, and all victims deserve protection. And I'm sure this will be taken up by the Home Office.
Dr. Ross Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 11.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A victim of an environmental crime can expect to receive the relevant services as set out in the Victims Code, and Police and Crime Commissioners receive annual grant funding from the Ministry of Justice to commission support for victims of all crime types. I would refer the Honourable Member for South Cotswolds, who I know is an avid campaigner in this area, to my ministerial colleagues in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, who would be able to answer more fully on how we tackle environmental crimes specifically.
Dr. Savage.
I thank the Minister for her response. Daniel's Well in Malmesbury is a much-loved local swim spot, but last week the Environment Agency warned swimmers to stay away, saying it was due to strong currents. However, Surfers Against Sewage have provided evidence that there have been a number of illegal sewage discharges and a number of swimmers have fallen ill. Last year, the Lib Dems tabled an amendment to the Victims and Prisoners Bill that would have allowed victims of environmental crime like sewage spills to claim compensation. I wonder if the Minister can explain why her party abstained from voting on that amendment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So the Honourable Member will know that the Water Special Measures Act 2025 gives the water industry regulators new powers to take tougher and faster action to crack down on water companies not delivering for customers and for the environment. She will also be aware that the Victims Code, covers victims of crime who are persons who have suffered harm as a direct result to being subjected to or witnessing a crime at the time that it occurred. In the vast majority of these types of cases, criminal conduct in relation to sewage and wastewater would be committed against the environment and not directly against the person. Where someone has been affected as a result, they are able to access services via the NHS, for example, to seek support.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Environmental crimes like fly tipping blight cities like mine in Gloucester, leaving victims across the city who are unable to enjoy the place that they love to live. Can the Minister confirm what discussions she's had with colleagues in MHCLG about how we can give local councils the powers and the resources to enforce action on fly tipping? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that really important question. Fly tipping is an issue that blights all of our communities, my own in Pontypridd as well as his in Gloucester. He will know that tougher streets, taking crime off our streets is a mission for this government, and we are working across government to deliver this, including in Gloucester, ensuring that local authorities have the powers that they need to go after the perpetrators of these crimes.
Fred Thomas.
Number 12, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government is committed to helping people with convictions find employment and turn away from reoffending. We are continuing to consider the criminal records regime, including recommendations made in Part 1 of Sir Brian Levison's review, to ensure it balances public safety with supporting rehabilitation.
Fred Thomas.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In my first surgery as an MP in Plymouth, I met a constituent who had received an unspent conviction for a one-off crime committed 34 years ago when they were a child. Since then, they've served their time, turned their life around and been a constructive member of society, been employed for 12 years, but in 2022, out of the blue, suspended for 2 years and eventually let go on account of an unspent conviction. He told me that being given an unspent conviction as a child is nothing short of being given a life sentence. This outdated practice is unfair. What plans do the government have to reform the law around unspent convictions to ensure that young offenders are given a genuine opportunity to rehabilitate and rebuild their lives?
Minister.
My honourable friend makes a very important point. I met with him and officials just last week to discuss his constituent's case and indeed this issue more broadly. As I've said already, Mr Speaker, we'll continue to look at Sir Brian's recommendation in relation to the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act 1974, but this is an issue we want to look at and to act on.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Minister very much for that. Minister, one of the implications of unspent convictions, of course, is the follow-on for those who have a passport and decide they want to go on holiday and they suddenly find that something that happened 25, 30 years ago when they were young, under 16. I've done a number of them in Northern Ireland this past while. It's wrong that those who have done a misdemeanour, as it was, and then find that it impacts upon them 30 years later. I had a constituent who wanted to go to Australia. We were able to, in contact with the Minister, to ensure that he was able to go, but the impact upon him and others is great. So could I ask the Minister, would he share with those in Northern Ireland and with the Immigration and the Passport Office in particular to ensure that those spent implications from years ago aren't held against them in the future life?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the honourable member's remarks. I think many members across the House will have constituents who have come to them with in similar circumstances, and it is deeply worrying, it's deeply troubling. It is complex because it involves different systems, and public safety is always paramount for this government. But absolutely, we're looking at it, and we'll report back to the House when we've made progress.
Anna Dixon.
13, Mr. Speaker.
The scale of violence against women and girls in our country is intolerable. The Ministry of Justice has already taken action by launching a pilot of domestic abuse protection orders in selected areas, introducing new criminal offences which capture creating sexually explicit deepfakes and spiking, announcing family court reforms such as expanding our Pathfinder programme in the family court, and commissioning the independent review of criminal courts in order to improve court timeliness to provide justice for victims.
Anna Dixon.
As a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I've been appalled at the failure of the last government to tackle the backlog in the courts, delaying justice for victims of domestic abuse and sexual abuse. I thank the Minister for her unwavering commitment to repair the justice system we inherited for victims and survivors. Can she outline the reforms to the family court specifically this government is introducing to protect victims of domestic abuse, including children, from further harm?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question and for her service on the Public Accounts Committee looking at this issue. We are committed as a government to better support adult and child victims of domestic abuse in the family courts. The Pathfinder model already provides access to expert support for victims, and published data has shown that the backlogs are over 50% lower and cases are resolved up to 30 weeks quicker. And importantly, Mr. Speaker, this government has announced that we will repeal the presumption of parental involvement when parliamentary time allows to protect children in our family courts.
Sarah Poacher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Justice Secretary confirm whether he is aware of anyone accused or convicted of a sexual offence having been granted asylum in the UK?
Minister.
I refer the honourable member to the stats published on the Ministry of Justice website.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister and the ministerial team from the Ministry of Justice for repealing the £318 for the Parv order a couple of weeks ago. This will make a huge, huge difference. But I wanted to raise the actual strategy and the fact that online abuse is on the rise. Does she agree with me that any party that says they want to repeal the Online Safety Act is not a party that cares about tackling violence against women and girls?
Minister.
Hear, hear. And can I thank my honourable friend for the brilliant work she's been doing in championing this issue of recently. The Online Safety Act ensures that online platforms are required to remove illegal content, such as harassing or abusive material, as soon as they are made aware of it. And this is a fundamental feature that we have in order to protect children in our country. And any party seeking to repeal this is not on the side of protecting children.
Mark Pritchard.
Across the West Midlands, there's currently a backlog of 6,000 Crown Court cases, many of those sexual offence cases. In Shropshire, with Crown Court at Shrewsbury, 759 cases outstanding. I just wonder, would the Minister commit to looking at the Midlands Circuit and seeing whether more RASO resources can be given in order that there could be suitably qualified and trained judges and advocates in order that these cases can be brought more quickly and swiftly to court? Because in Shropshire, some of these court cases are potentially 2 years out.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question and the way in which he asks it. Look, this government, as he will know, is doing all we can to bear down on the backlog in our Crown Courts. That's why we've tasked Sir Brian Levison to look at how we can best get to grips with this. But he is right. I sadly have spoken to far too many rape and sexual violent victims who are waiting far too long for their day in court, and the impact that is having on them. We are straining every sinew, working with the judiciary, working with colleagues in the CPS to better support these victims to ensure that when they do get that day in court, that they are able to access justice appropriately and they have the best support available to them. I will happily work with him and anyone else in this House to ensure that any victim of crime has the support that they need.
Kieran Mullen, Shadow Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, last week I'm being told by my colleague, the Shadow Minister, that the sentencing bill would cut prison time for rapists and child groomers. The Minister for Violence Against Women and Girls said she would have to, and I quote, go away and check whether that was true. Mr. Speaker, the time to check should have been before she voted for the bill, but I'm hoping surely the Victims Minister knows and can tell the House what proportion of rapists and child groomers sent to prison will have their prison time cut by Labour's sentencing bill.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, make no mistake, this is a choice that this government had to make because of their government's catastrophic mismanagement of our prison system. We are not, Mr Speaker, abolishing short sentences, and judges will retain full discretion to keep offenders locked up. We have built safeguards into the systems to protect victims, but I would remind the Shadow Minister that the greatest threat to victims is the risk of not being able to lock up any dangerous offender in the first place. These measures that this government are introducing will ensure that that will never happen again.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Yet again, we have a government and a victims minister who can't tell the House basic facts about the implications of their bill. I'll tell her that 60% of rapists and 90% of child groomers sent to prison will have their prison time cut. That's appalling. And Mr Speaker, we also know knives are all too often a feature of violence against women and girls. The House will have seen the tragic news that the female victim of a brutal knife attack in Birmingham on Friday, Katie Fox, has died. Over the last few weeks, the Labour government has been talking tough on knife crime. But can the Minister tell the House what proportion of criminals sent to prison for carrying a knife will have to serve only a third of their sentence under Labour's appalling sentencing bill?
Minister.
Well, of course, my thoughts and the thoughts of the whole House are with Katie's family after the horrific crime that occurred in Birmingham. However, the honourable member clearly is incapable of facing up to the reality that his government left behind. It is this government that is protecting victims and ensuring that violence against women and girls is a political priority of this government. It is ensuring that we never again are faced with the reality of having to let offenders out early without any safeguards in place. It is this government that put those safeguards in place, and it is this government that is ensuring that we are protecting the public.
Vicky Slade.
Sorry, Mr Speaker. I wasn't aware, wasn't it? Question 15.
Minister.
This government inherited a justice system on its knees, starved for years of adequate funding. But we are fixing the foundations. We are investing in our buildings, we're investing in our people, and we're investing in record sitting days, sitting at or close to maximum judicial capacity in every jurisdiction. That's how we are fixing the court system.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was fortunate to visit Paul Magistrates Court last week, and it's interesting to mention about the state of the buildings because they were appalling. But I was most concerned when the district judge and court manager explained to me that there's no shortage of magistrates and there's no shortage of court space. What there is a shortage of legal advisors in the system. They explained that the funding for one extra legal advisor would allow them to progress 500 cases a year, and they simply can't retain them. So what is she doing to review that role and make sure that we can get those smaller cases through quickly?
Minister.
Well, she is absolutely right that our court staff are the backbone of our court system and they make it tick every day. It's an absolute pleasure as the Courts Minister to visit courts like the one she described. I visited recently Snaresbrook Crown Court, and it was a pleasure to meet with staff there, specifically on legal advisors. As she says, they are critical to the functioning of the Magistrates' Court, and that's why we are investing an additional £5.2 million to address the retention challenges which she describes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my honourable friend is right to commend court staff, but also to highlight the significant issues in the court system. In my time on the Public Accounts Committee, we uncovered problems with the buildings, with the IT systems, with the probation service, with the whole system in real difficulty. How long does she think it's going to take this government to clear up the mess the last government left?
Minister.
Well, she's absolutely right that we have a mountain to climb and we cannot fix the foundations overnight. What I can tell her is that we are a government that is committed to restoring the public's confidence in the justice system. It's why through this spending review we have committed an additional £450 million to the court system, and that means, as I said, investing in our buildings, investing in our people to restore the public's confidence in our system.
Reopen shortly to help you, Sir Julian Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Question number 16.
Minister.
Well, first of all, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman's commitment on this issue. We had an incredibly constructive debate in Westminster Hall on the topic of third-party litigation funding recently. Litigation funding is what enabled Alan Bates and the sub-postmasters to fund their landmark legal action against the Post Office. It plays a critical role in access to justice and plays a vital role in contributing to our economy. For that reason, I am carefully considering alongside colleagues our response to the Civil Justice Council's review to ensure that our reforms get it right.
Julian.
I thank the Minister for that answer and for the constructive debate a week or so ago. Can I press her on timing? Because, as she said, this is important for consumers, businesses and for the legal sector, but also to test the opportunities for early dispute resolution, which were mentioned in the CJC report and which I would encourage the government to look at seriously.
Well, I thank him for that, and as he will appreciate, it's an incredibly detailed report with a whole host of recommendations, and it's important that we go through that very, very carefully. We've all seen the uncertainty created by the Supreme Court judgment in PACAR. We're looking at what would be the appropriate response to that, because if we are going to effectively reverse the effect of that judgment, then we want to build back better and get the reforms right so that we can achieve the access to justice and the economic benefit that he so rightly says that he's committed to.
Clive Jones, Topicals.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, since the last Justice oral session, I am proud to have taken the next steps towards putting a landmark Hillsborough law onto the statute book with the second reading of the Public Office Accountability Bill in this office. There has also understandably been widespread interest in the number of releases in error from prisons. I can tell the House that in the year to March 2025, there were 262 releases in error, and my department has today published data showing that from April to the end of October this year, there were a further 91 mistaken releases. I'm clear that we must bear down on these numbers, and in my oral statement later today, I look forward to updating the House on the steps the government's taking to reverse this trend.
Clive Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Thames Valley Police and Crime Commissioner said that the public should be doing more to stop shoplifting. This week, my constituent Sarah described being smacked into during a shoplifting incident and the fear that she felt at that moment. Does the Minister agree that with the Police and Crime Commissioner that Sarah is part of the problem? Or does he think the bigger problem is that shoplifters know that more than 80% of these offences result in no charge at all?
So state.
This does require more neighbourhood policing and bobbies on the beat, which he knows under the last government was cut. But I also think under the sentencing bill, the intensive supervision courts can make a huge difference. A lot of shoplifters do need a judge checking in with them regularly, dealing sometimes with their addiction issue to get them to change course.
Harpreet Tupple. Not here. Sheriff Secretary of State Robin Gentleman.
Last week, the National Police Chiefs Council said that there was no doubt that the government's early release scheme was going to lead to an increase in crime. It followed the news. A man who'd been released from prison early has been charged with murder. So it's a simple question. Will the Justice Secretary rule out any more early release schemes for prisoners?
Sheriff State.
Can I just remind the right honourable gentleman that just before the general election in July, his government had 3 different versions of their early release scheme. And we inherited a situation, and he knows this, where prison capacity was completely unsustainable. And successive Justice Secretary under his previous government have said that in the last week. We brought forward our early release scheme. It was important to do that, to put capacity into the system, but it's the sentencing bill that will begin to deal with this issue in a comprehensive way.
Robert Jenrick.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you strip all that waffle back, he didn't deny it, did he? And that's interesting, because there's been another accidental release by the Ministry of Justice. And this time, it's an email sent in error by his officials to me. It shows his department are looking to accommodate criminals in the community instead of in prison. As you'd expect from him, they say their plans are, and I quote, a finger-in-the-air approach. They say they're considering spending up to 100 grand a year per person to live outside of prison. That's more than the cost of a prison cell. Can the Justice Secretary really say, with a straight face, that his latest scheme is a good use of taxpayers' money?
The right honourable gentleman knows that that email that was sent in error referred to women. And he knows that when you're talking about women, offenders, understandably, the system must consider the fact that many of them are mothers. Many of them have been the victims of men who have groomed them, who have pimped them, who have abused them. And that's why, understandably, public policy makers do look at alternative ways to deal with women in the community. None of us in this House should make any apologies for that.
Rachel Hopkins.
Mr Speaker, meaningful activity and access to education in prison are key to supporting those leaving prison with the skills and tools they need to move away from crime. However, reports from the UCU are that recent changes to the education contract have triggered notable job losses. So could the Secretary of State provide an update on how the government is supporting the prison education system to help reduce reoffending?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a characteristically important question by my honourable friend. Education has a vital role in our prisons to clamp down on reoffending and to help rehabilitation. We're working at pace to look at how we can improve education within the prison system, as well as in the third sector, as well as through the formal contracts that we already have. And indeed, I'm going to a prison just in the next few weeks, looking at literacy rates with my right honourable friend, the member for Combe Valley. There is work to do on this. It's not good enough at the moment, and we're going to get on with that in the weeks ahead.
Jess Brentford, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Reports by charities and by the Domestic Abuse Commissioner shows that the family court system, which is plagued by delays, continues to provide a perfect environment for perpetrators of domestic abuse to continue to coerce and control, and training in identifying the signs of domestic abuse is not currently mandatory. So when will the government bring forward legislation to reform the family court system, and when will they make domestic abuse training mandatory for all in the family courts?
Minister.
Well, I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for that question. She will be aware that this government has announced that we will be repealing the presumption of parental contact when parliamentary time allows. That is a priority for this government. It is a priority for this government that we do all we can to protect victims of domestic abuse in the family courts. That's why we've introduced our domestic abuse protection order pilots. However, she will know that the judiciary are independent. Training for them is a matter for the Judicial College, but we are working with the judiciary very closely to ensure that they can spot the signs of coercive and controlling behaviour, so that we can do all that we can to protect victims of these crimes.
Reader.
Mr Speaker, I'm very fortunate to get very thorough updates from my Police Fire Crime Commissioner, Danielle Stone, and in my latest one she told me she's seeing real improvements in the probation service, but Northamptonshire still has a 40% vacancy rate in staff. Will the Secretary of State set out for us what his department's doing to support recruitment and retention of those skilled staff that we need in the sector?
So State.
He's absolutely right. We recruited over 1,000 last year, 1,300 this year. We must retain them. Key to that is reducing caseloads, and that's why I'm introducing AI.
Play again.
A 2022 victim survey found only 10% of victims believed that the criminal justice system was effective. What steps is the government taking to support victims of violence against women and girls, and will ensure that all police and prosecutors receive training in understanding the impact of trauma on survivors?
Minister.
She will know that this government has made a priority to put victims at the heart of the criminal justice system, and we are specifically looking at crimes committed against women and girls. We are working across government with the Home Office, working with the police, the CPS, the Attorney General's Office, to ensure that all agencies of the state and all of society gets to grip with these crimes in order to bear down on this issue, so that we can all live safe wherever we are.
Sarah Owen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Court backlogs cause painful waits for survivors of rape and sexual assault. A system that fell apart under the previous government means only around 3% of rape reports result in charge. What is the Minister doing to reduce these waiting times for cases of rape and sexual assault?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. Rape charges have doubled since 2019, and we have asked Sir Brian Leveson to propose bold reforms to deliver swifter justice for all victims, and we are funding a record allocation of sitting days in the Crown Court. This government is spending £350 million on supporting victims of crime this year, and we are determined to do all we can for these victims.
We're a Hamas.
Mr Speaker, and following on from that, still fewer than 3% of rape cases result in a charge. It takes 400 days for resolution. painful, painful delays for victims. We have talked about this for so long, so often. What are the barriers of change?
Minister.
Well, she raises a really important point, and what we need is investment, structural reform and modernisation, i.e. the adoption of technology. It's why we've asked Sir Brian Leveson to conduct his detailed review. We've got part one, which suggests to us that structural reform. We're waiting part two, which should arrive by the end of the year, which will direct us as to how we can drive efficiency and get swifter justice for all victims, but in particular, those of serious sexual offences.
Red Beavers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sasha Marsden was 16 years old when she was murdered, then raped and then set on fire by David Minto. Sasha's sister Katie, my constituent, who joins us today, is campaigning for victims' families to have fairer access to sentencing appeals. Despite the need for closure in sentencing, perpetrators are given multiple appeal opportunities, while victims' families have just one chance. What will the government do to ensure victims' families do not have less rights than the perpetrators in this process?
This government is determined to put victims at the heart of the criminal justice system. Can I commend my honourable friend for representing Katie Brett and her family? And I have had the extreme honour of meeting with Katie Brett just this morning and previously to discuss Sasha's law and her campaigning on this. I am determined to work with her and all of the other Victims for Justice families to ensure that we get this right. The Victims and Courts Bill is currently moving through Parliament, and I am determined that we do all we can to support those victims.
John Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scotland's First Minister John Swinney is not often right, and he's wrong again with his slavish devotion to the ECHR. So if this place is to update the ECHR to make it fit for the 21st century, what steps can the right honourable gentleman take to make sure that Soft Touch Scotland doesn't become a backdoor for Article 8 applications?
Minister.
As the Justice Secretary has stated already during this oral question, this government is committed to the ECHR. That includes the whole of Great Britain. But clearly, there are issues in ensuring that convention and our international obligations evolve with the challenges that we face as a country. That is why we're looking at how it is implemented and clarified in domestic law, and we continue to work with European partners about European reform, and that includes Scotland too.
Folks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Victims and Courts Bill protects children by putting important restrictions on parental responsibility following certain serious sexual offences, and thanks to incredible campaigners on this side of the House. One of my constituents is a fierce campaigner for services and safety measures for children whose parent has committed a sexual offence against a child outside of the family home. Children in the home are victims even though they were not directly abused. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure all children of child sex offenders are offered better protection and support?
Minister.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for that question and for her constituents' incredible campaigning on this issue. Children are victims in their own right. The Domestic Abuse Act puts that in law. However, there is a discrepancy in terms of what sort of services and support these children can get. The Victims Code currently sets out the minimum level of service that victims of crime should receive. We will be consulting on a new Victims Code shortly, and I am determined that we ensure that we get this Victims Code right for all victims, including children of these heinous crimes.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did the government vote against releasing migrant crime data?
Who's done? Anybody want it? Sarah.
He knows successive governments make data releases. Those data releases have to be analysed properly. We make no excuses for voting in the appropriate way.
Right. Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Richard Pike was the victim of a violent attack in his workplace in March of this year. When he met the CPS barrister on the day of sentencing, he was given his victim impact statement 5 minutes before he was going into court. It had been amended. He was not allowed to say how he felt when he was tried to be murdered. He was no longer allowed to say he was manipulated into a vulnerable position. He was not allowed to state how he felt about the release of the perpetrator. What assurances can the Minister give victims of serious crimes such as attempted murder that they won't be censored in such a way?
Stop.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and it was a pleasure to meet with her to discuss Richard's case, and all of my thoughts are with him as he seeks to recover from this horrible crime. It is important that victims' voices are represented in the courtroom and in sentencing. She will know that a victim impact statement is classed as a piece of evidence, so it does have to be quite carefully worded. However, I have heard the strength of feeling from her constituent and others on this, and we are working with victims to ensure that they get the support that they need to be able to articulately and clearly set out exactly how the crimes have impacted them.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, when we had the prisoner release check statement, the Secretary of State called my question ridiculous, so I'll try a different tact. Has the Secretary of State spoken to the family affected in Epping?
Secretary of State.
I said last week that I was keen to meet with the family, and I will meet with the family when they meet with the Prisons Minister, I hope in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've seen a lack of maintenance of prisons, a stop-start to the prison building programme, and all the challenges in our courts. Isn't it any surprise that we're looking at non-custodial sentences for the lower offenders? And does the Secretary of State agree with me that the opposition front bench has some cheek to come to this House when the failures in the system are down to 14 years of failure?
Secretary of State.
Well, I know that my right honourable friend did a valiant job as chair of the Public Accounts Committee, constantly revisiting these issues, and she will have noticed how successive Justice Secretaries under the last government have said that they cut the numbers, they failed to invest, violence were up, and now we've got junior staff making very, very important decisions.
Afterwards, yeah. Dr. Pinkerton.
I've been contacted by a Surrey Heath resident who hasn't just endured and survived appalling domestic abuse, but is also now enduring and attempting to survive the family court process with multiple hearings over child contact arrangements. Can I ask the Minister whether she will today commit to implementing the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's recent recommendations to better protect children at risk?
I thank him for his question. This government is clear that child safety during court-ordered contact is vital. We are improving multi-agency working to support early identification of risk and enable referral to specialist domestic abuse support. We are carefully considering the Domestic Abuse Commissioner's report, and we will publish a response by the end of this year.
Julian Lewis.
What does the Deputy Prime Minister have to say about the unprecedented letter in the Times today from 9 former recent heads of the armed forces stating that the government's Northern Ireland Troubles and Legacy legislation breaks the compact between service personnel who do their duty and the government who should stand up for them, not open them up through endless litigation and persecution?
Well, I saw the Northern Ireland Secretary's statement last week. He will know that there has been considerable lawfare, and he will know that the scheme that was proposed by his government was largely thrown out by the courts. And that's why the Veterans Minister has listened very keenly, not just to military families, but to all those who were victims of the Troubles in Northern Ireland.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State today agree to publish clear, honest and regular statistics on the number of illegal migrants convicted of sexual offences, murder or indeed any other crime? A yes or no answer will do well.
Secretary of State.
Well, we do publish data release statistics in the usual way. After they've been properly analysed, we've got to make sure that all facts are verified, and we've done that in the same way that the last government did.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with the Chief Executive of an international charity that happens to be based in Wiltshire, where there have been serious historic allegations. Unfortunately, the resourcing of such inquiries falls between the SFO, the National Crime Agency, Wiltshire Police and the Charity Commission. Will one of the ministers meet with me? Because it's not right that serious allegations like this don't get checked by the charity. Charity investigations aren't conducted properly.
Very happy to look at it and ensure that the minister meets with him.
Caroline Budd.
Mr. Speaker. Sexual exploitation is being perpetrated on an industrial scale by pimping websites, which currently enjoy near total legal impunity,
move sexual exploitation off the street and into locations like flats and hotels where outreach is harder and coercion of vulnerable women can thrive. Given that advertising prostitution in a phone box was made illegal 25 years ago, can the government explain why they are yet to outlaw the same advertising online?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. She will know that we need to tackle violence against women and girls in all its forms everywhere. I have regularly meet with my counterparts at the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and the Government will be publishing our Violence Against Women and Girls strategy shortly.
Right, Rankin.
Old Windsor is a small village in my constituency with an approved premises which has morphed to include high-risk offenders. It causes problems. Will the Minister agree with me that 1. Probation services have responsibility for residents' behaviour when they're outside that facility, and 2. that police should have more focus in Old Windsor than they might otherwise have given the location of that facility?
Minister.
It's absolutely right that probation service take those facilities and those premises incredibly seriously. Of course, we're investing more in probation services than ever before, a 45% increase, £750 million, fixing a probation service that was utterly dismantled by the last Conservative government. And so I hope that your constituents can be reassured that this government is getting on with the job with ensuring our probation is fit for purpose.
Final question, Lee Anderson.
Mr. Speaker, it's been reported in the media that we have prison officers working in our prisons that can barely speak a word of English. In fact, they're using flashcards to instruct prisoners to go back to the cell. Now, you don't have to be a mastermind to realise that this is a recipe for disaster. So can the Justice Secretary please tell me if this is true or not?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I visit prisons regularly in this job, and I pay tribute to the incredible work that prison officers do, day in, day out, including prison officers who come from other countries who do sterling work, making sure that our prisons are safe in appalling circumstances. And so I thank them for their work, and I reject the premise of the question.
That completes the questions. We now come to the first statement. Lord Chancellor.
Well, Mr. Speaker, with permission, I'll make a statement on releases in error from prison. Let me begin on Armistice Day by paying tribute to those we honour, members of both houses and parliamentary staff who gave their tomorrow for our today. Whatever divides our politics, today we remember what binds us together, our belief in service and pursuit of the common good. Mr. Speaker, on Wednesday the 5th of November, I answered Prime Minister's questions. As someone who served in this House for 25 years, I take my responsibilities to Parliament incredibly seriously. The House will recall that I was asked repeatedly whether any asylum-seeking offender had been released in error. At that time, I had been alerted of the release of Brahim Kadir Sharif from HMP Wandsworth. Details about the case were still emerging throughout Wednesday. Importantly, my officials had not had confirmation about whether or not he was an asylum seeker. Indeed, it was not until later that afternoon that the Home Office confirmed to the Ministry of Justice that he was not. Given the nature of the opposition's question, I made a judgment that I would wait until I had all the detail, rather than risk giving an inaccurate or incomplete or misleading picture to the House about a sensitive case. Members opposite may argue that they would have handled the situation differently. All I can do is be open about the factors I was weighing at the time, and that the data in the system we inherited is painfully slow. I thank the Speaker for the opportunity to update the House in full today. Members will recall that following the release of Hadoush Kabatu on the 24th of October, I put in place stronger release checks. I can confirm that the error leading to Mr. Kadir Sharif's release happened in September before those checks came in. He was charged with burglary at Snaresbrook Crown Court, and a warrant was issued to HMP Pentonville for his remand. Contrary to the set-down process, it was then forwarded by email to HMP Wandsworth when Mr. Kadir Sharif was transferred. However, staff did not pick it up, and he was released on the 29th of October. Mr. Kadir Sharif was taken back into custody on the 7th of November by Haringey Police. I'm grateful to officers from my part of North London again after they also rearrested Mr. Kabatu. I'm grateful too to the wider Metropolitan Police and the public who assisted them. I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, that in the year to March 2025, there were around 57,000 routine releases from prison. In that same time, there were 262 releases in error from prison. New data my department published today shows that from April to the end of October this year, there were 91 releases in error from prison. Further data on the breakdown of offences are official statistics that need to be combed through in detail before being put into the public domain. This was not a publication due today, but we recognise the public interest in being transparent about the overall number. It's important to note that this may be revised as additional cases are subsequently recorded, but this is the very latest that I have been provided. We understand that there are 3 mistakenly released prisoners currently lawfully at large. Their prison records show none of these are convicted sex offenders. I have been informed, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon that HMPPS are investigating a further case of a potential release in error on the 3rd of November who may still be at large. It is symptomatic of the data issues we inherited that all this information I have been given at this time while police and HMPPS investigate. Of the confirmed cases, Case 1 was in prison for failing to surrender to the police and released in error in December 2024. Case 2 was in a prison for a Class B drug offence and released in error in August 2024. And Case 3 was in prison for aggravated burglary and released in error in June 2025. 2 are a British national and 1 is a foreign national offender. I will not provide any further details on individual cases. In each case, we have to consider the welfare of victims and the judgment of our law enforcement agencies. Of the 262 releases in error from prison in the year to March 2025, 87 were of offenders whose main offence was violence against the person, and 3 whose main offence was a sexual offence. I'm clear that we must bear down on these numbers, which are symptomatic of a prison system under horrendous strain. As the Shadow Justice Secretary admitted last week, the state of the prison service has been unacceptable for a very long time, including under the Conservative government. Prisons today are still struggling with violence. The safety and custody statistics show an 8% rise in the rate of assaults in the year to June 2025. Systems are archaic. Every prisoner's sentence is worked out on paper, considering the type of offence and the legislation covered by it. Mr. Speaker, there are more than 500 pages of sentence management guidance. Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to prison officers doing an incredibly important job. But as the Prison Officers Association has said, prisons throughout the country are underfunded, they're understaffed, and they're operating under relentless strain. Frontline prison officers were cut by a quarter between 2010 and 2017. That's around 6,000 fewer people, and means that there are less experienced staff, which places more pressure on the system. And unsurprisingly, mistakes happen in those circumstances. Indeed, from 2010-11 to the end of 23-24, under the previous government, there were 860 known releases in error from prison. We must recognise the distress caused to victims, knowing that the person who harmed them is free when they should be behind bars. In the worst cases, like William Fernandez back in 2021, prisoners have committed further horrific offences, I give an unequivocal apology to all who have faced worry or worse as a result of releases in error, especially Hadush Kabatu's victims, who I'm offered to meet. I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman opposite will join me in that apology to all who have suffered because of releases in error under this and previous governments. Mr. Speaker, human error will always exist, and no Justice Secretary could prevent every mistake. But we must reduce the risk and reverse the trend over the course of this Parliament. But we must be honest, the release process requires a radical overhaul, and establishing the facts in individual cases is complex. Decisions about public statements rightly rest with the police. Issuing details too early could frustrate covert inquiries or put police officers or the public at risk. These are judgments for experienced operational leaders, and parliamentarians must give them the space to make them. Mr. Speaker, this is a complex issue. We must be straight with the public about that, and I'm clear that we have a mountain to climb in response. So first, I'm chairing a new Justice Performance Board. It will give a comprehensive view of prisons and criminal court performance, including releases in error, to drive a step change in how we respond. The first monthly meeting took place yesterday. Secondly, I'm making sure we understand the issues. Following the release of Kabatu, I asked Dame Lynn Owens to carry out a review. This will conclude by the end of February next year. It will now include the adequacy of data collected and published on releases in error, and we fully expect to uncover additional incidents. I can also announce that we will set up a team of data scientists to review historic releases in error to understand what's going wrong. Third, I'm improving processes, because some of these errors actually originated not in the prison process, but in the court process. I will implement an urgent warrant query unit supported by court experts so that prisons can escalate queries and get rapid clarifications to reduce the risk of releases in error that emanate from the court system. We're also issuing instructions to court staff to reinforce mandatory requirements for imprisonment orders, to be confirmed verbally with judges before finalising a measure which has been shared with the judiciary. The court and the prison service are also scoping a joint exercise to look at live warrants, initially taking place within the London region. It will identify errors and ensure prisoners are subject to the correct warrants. Fourth, I'm accelerating upgrades. I stood up a digital rapid response team last week to reduce human error with cutting-edge technology. Over the next 6 months, we will provide up to £10 million to deliver AI and technology solutions to help frontline staff avoid mistakes and support them to calculate sentences accurately. Finally, I'm simplifying the release policy. One of the aims of the sentencing bill is to standardise how cases are treated, and following Dame Lynn Owens' review, we will consider whether amendments are required to operational policy. These are the initial steps to address the issue, but I will update the House where further changes are necessary. I commend this statement to the House.
Right, can I just clear something up? And it's not got to happen. First of all, I was told Justice Secretary needed 13 minutes. Just bear with me. And I said, look, you need to ask. And in the end, the department came back and said, oh no, it's 10. It then wasn't 10, it was almost 12 minutes. I will work with Ministers and Secretary of State, but it is 10 minutes. If there needs to be an extension, please ask, don't keep changing the times, because in the end, it is unfair to shadow ministers when it goes over. So what I would say is, you've got an extra minute, you've got an extra half a minute, but please, stick to the rules of 10. If you do need longer, I am always sympathetic as long as I know in advance. But to have this conversation with the department that it was no longer needed makes your department look foolish, and it certainly am not going to make me look foolish in the future. Shadow Justice Secretary.
So, Mr. Speaker, we're back here again then. At least the Justice Secretary gets some use out of his new suit. But But where has Wednesday's bombast and bravado gone? Get a grip, man, he thundered last week, without even a hint of irony. None of that today, was there? And why is that? Well, it's because, like increasing numbers of criminals in our jails, the Justice Secretary just doesn't know whether he's coming or going. Even his colleagues in government are now turning on him, some with unbridled contempt. The handling is terrible, was the verdict of a cabinet minister. Just rank incompetence. Cowardly. Frankly, pretty dodgy, was the verdict of another. Before long, the Prime Minister will be saying he has full confidence in him. And we all know what that means. Look, 2 weeks ago, he came to the House and he said he had put in place the strongest checks ever to stop releases in error. 48 hours later, another prisoner with a history of sex offences was released in error. 7 days later, and a fraudster is let out the very day he was sentenced to 45 months inside. And today, he admits that he's lost another prisoner that same day. They're Lammy's lags, a whole new category of criminal who can just waltz out of prison despite having the strongest ever checks introduced by this Justice Secretary. The public are being endangered as this circus rumbles on, week after week, with no end in sight. When will he put a stop to it? He can't just hide behind the inquiry that he's commissioned. He couldn't even get the head of the review, Lynn Owens, name right last week. Anne Owens. Anne Owens, he bellowed. Well, I looked her up, and the only Anne Owens I could find was a panto performer who recently appeared in Alice in Wonderland. Perhaps she was the one who gave him some tips on his performance at the dispatch box last week. The former Chief Inspector of Prisons says that this has been caused, at least in part, by the confusion created by Labour's botched early release scheme. Does he now concede that there is a link between the doubling of prisoners accidentally released in the last year and the introduction of their SDS 40? Or is it just an extremely unlucky coincidence? Don't take us for fools. And Mr. Speaker, when will he finally come clean? He won't provide details in parliamentary questions. He won't answer even when he is here for Prime Minister's questions. He won't respond to letters. Well, perhaps that's because they weren't addressed to the Deputy Prime Minister. He's now been dragged here, kicking and screaming, to admit that one prisoner has been on the run from this Labour government for 14 months, and 91 have been accidentally released over the last 7 months. But the Justice Secretary is so clueless, he's literally lost track of how many prisoners he's lost. He says today a prisoner may have been accidentally released last Monday. Well, has he looked? He's either in his cell or he's not. What a complete and utter farce he's presiding over. As we all suspected, the crisis on his government's watch is even bigger than he dared admit. That's why he wouldn't say anything last week. Prisoners are being accidentally released nearly every other day and putting our constituents, his constituents, at risk. At this rate, he's on track for 156 prisoners to be accidentally released this year, which would be a record were it not for the doubling his government managed to achieve last year under their watch. And in his statement today, he poses more questions than he manages to answer. How many crimes were committed by those prisoners whilst they were on the run? Why can't he tell us who these 91 prisoners are? Who is the foreign criminal? And who is this mystery fourth offender he may have lost? How can he possibly be found if the public don't have his face? They don't have his name, like they did for Sharif and Kabatu. The public deserve to know the truth. And this situation could not be any more serious. There's been a 9-fold increase in the number of violent offenders accidentally released in the last year. A 9-fold increase. The criminal justice system, under his watch, has been made to look a total mockery. The public are being put at risk. In his own words, Mr. Speaker, it's time for him to get a grip or go.
Justice Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a crisis that we inherited in our prison system. And it's worthy of sober reflection, because he knows, Mr. Speaker, that when they were in government, there were 17 prisoners released in error every month. He knows that. He knows too, because the former Conservative Justice Secretary said on the issue last Friday, we essentially run our prisons regime very hot. We are very close to capacity. We have seen a big increase in the prison population over the last 20 years, and resources have not necessarily matched that. That is the first problem. And another former Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, said part of the issue is we can't hold on to prison officers without that expertise. Errors creep in. And he himself also challenged their record in office. So he knows that this is a cross-party issue that, of course, we have to grip. Now, I said that I put in place those checks, and I stand by the checks that I put in. I also said in my statement that the cases that we are uncovering, many of them occurred before those checks were in place, and another case involved an error that was in the court system, and that's why this new query process is very important indeed. And it is the case that we had to introduce SDS 40, and he knows why that's the case, because his government, just in the last few months in office, made 3 different changes to their early release scheme. So worried were they about prison capacity, a prison capacity issue that we inherited. He knows 500 extra places in the prison system is all that they built in 14 years in office, 14 years, and we've pledged 14,000 by 2031. He also knows, like night follows day, if you cut officers by almost 50%, is what they did in office, you cut those officers, and then you recruit new officers, as we've attempted to do. These are very junior people working hard, and I thank them for all that they're doing. But in those circumstances, mistakes will be made. I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this, really, really important. I've put in place the digital team because he knows also that this is a system based on human beings, therefore you get error. Only technology will fix this issue over time. And I've now put in place this double check between the court and the prison system.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the initiatives the Lord Chancellor has announced to deal with the wrongful release, but does he accept that the level and circumstances of such releases are symptomatic of a deeper malaise? Will he look at the Justice Committee current reports on drug culture, organised crime and lack of education and work in prisons? And will he commit to tackling the underlying breakdown of order and discipline in the prison system, which over years of decline have made many prisons unsafe, chaotic and unfit for purpose?
Justice.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for all that he is doing, and he has been on these issues for many years. His words echo those of the prison inspector. And of course he knows that this is a system that's incredibly hot, frankly, because violence is up, self-harm is an issue, drones and the things that are arriving in prison, particularly drugs, is also an issue. And then we have staff doing the best they can in very, very difficult circumstances. He knows too that no government could turn around the austerity that this public service saw in 16 months in office.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Jess Brownfellow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the situation wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. It seems like people have tougher checks to currently speak to an advisor at HMRC or get a GP appointment than offenders have to be released from a prison. Since the mistaken releases of recent weeks, I have heard horrendous reports from prison officers inside prisons. Prisoners identified by low-quality black and white photographs, printed on paper, a few basic questions on personal information before being cleared for release, information that could be readily shared between inmates before release. That is not good enough, especially when we now have biometric technology which is currently used for visitors to prisons and not inmates. We cannot be relying on an honour-based system, reliant on the goodwill of convicts to hand themselves in, and police forces certainly don't have spare capacity to be conducting regular manhunts for people that should still be locked up. After the release of Hadush Kabatu, the Deputy Prime Minister promised enhanced security checks. Yet since then, some of society's most dangerous individuals have still ended up on our streets. So will he now spell out what those enhanced checks actually involve and whether biometric testing is used routinely to confirm a prisoner's identity before release? And can he confirm what training prison officers receive before managing prison releases? Like most of the justice system, our prison system has been mismanaged and underfunded by the previous complacent Conservative government. So we do appreciate that this government inherited this mess. However, the numbers of mistaken prisoner releases have risen sharply under their watch, and they cannot continue to risk public safety, particularly given the fact that it took them a whole 7 days to realise a prisoner had been mistakenly released and are seemingly blaming an email being unread for the most recent error. Can he confirm how long the Ministry of Justice has known about the 3 prisoners at large and how long have the police been trying to find them? The Deputy Prime Minister has promised the public an investigation, but they cannot wait months for answers while their safety continues to be put at risk. So what immediate action can he take today to ensure that dangerous criminals stay behind bars and these mistakes stop once and for all?
Secretary of State.
Well, can I say to the Honourable Lady, when she reflects on the releases in error, that 57,000 people are released from prison every year, and I'm sure, like me, she would commend the good work of prison officers and those in offender management units across our prisons doing a very difficult job in what are very difficult circumstances. She refers to the complexity. The last government kept expanding its emergency release scheme from 18 days first, then to 35 days, then to 70 days. And at 2021, a review found 503 pages of guidance that staff had to follow for early release. It's a paper-based system. And so I cannot stand here as a Secretary of State and say that in a paper-based system that you can eradicate all human error. You can't. The only way to deal with that would be technology, to bring those levels down to something that I think the House would think was acceptable. I want to see the figure come down to historic levels over the course of this in Parliament. It will, of course, take further investment, but I hope that the investment in 10 million in this new digital team, and indeed the support that we're offering now between courts and prisons, will make a substantial difference. She asked me what I'm doing: a new Justice Performance Board, of course Damien Owen's review, the urgent query process that I've outlined, the digital rapid response system, and of course simplifying the release policy, which is effectively what comes out of the sentencing bill.
Rinda Jess.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that wrongful releases of prisoners would have caused a lot of distress and anxiety to the victims, their families and others? But does he also agree excuse me, that we inherited a prison system that was in complete chaos, and it was in such a major breakdown that whilst we are taking the appropriate action now to sort out the prison system and to prevent wrongful releases, this is going to take some time?
So, State.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question, and he's absolutely right. And I think the public recognise this, that they won't particularly have visited our prisons, but they know that cuts in our public services are real. They see it in their local authorities. They see it in their local hospitals. They see it in their local schools. They know that things like Sure Start were decimated. And so too, our prison service, which the public don't see, I'm afraid was one of the worst hit public services. Now, it's my job to minimise that risk to the public, and that's why I'm introducing the measures that we are. That's why I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this very, very carefully, former head of the National Crime Agency, and I know she'll do a forensic examination, and I'll implement her recommendations so we can bear down on this problem. But it's a paper-based system. I didn't realise coming into this job that it was a paper-based system. I'm not sure the Shadow Justice Secretary has realised at all since he's been doing this job that it's a paper. But his former Justice Secretaries under his government know that it's a paper-based system, and they know that's why errors happen.
Dr. Neil Shastra-Hurst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mistaken releases of prisoners don't just undermine public trust and confidence in the system, they cost money. They cost money because the police have to go and find them and return them to prison. Can the Secretary of State set out how much it has cost the police to return prisoners to prison since this government came to power?
So State.
Well, previous governments did not have that data, and I'm pretty confident that I don't have that data. If it does exist, it exists with individual police forces who deal with these issues operationally. But he's absolutely right. Every prisoner released in error has to be found by the police. I thank the police for all that they've done, and I particularly thank Haringey Police for finding the 2 high-profile cases.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the system in force for many years, the government cannot initiate deportation action until after minimum custodial terms have been served. So can the Deputy Prime Minister commit to ensuring that measures removing all minimum custodial requirements will be implemented so that eligible foreign offenders can be removed as soon as possible after sentencing so victims can be spared the distress we've recently seen?
I can give him that undertaking. That's why we brought forward the sentencing review. That's why we've increased the removal of foreign national offenders for 5,000. All of it done in the last 16 months, something they never did once.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 days before Kadur Sharif was released, the Justice Secretary said he had introduced the strictest checks ever seen in our prison system to stop similar unacceptable errors in future. Were they not implemented, or are they not strict enough?
So State.
I say to the Honourable Judge, were you not listening? I discussed the cases. I discussed the cases just a few moments ago. I discussed that those cases emanated prior to those checks, so many of them, and that those cases also, one of the errors started in the court system. It's also the case, and I've been crystal clear about that with the House, in a paper-based system where the most junior people often in our OMUs are dealing with this, you cannot eradicate all human error. And any Secretary of State that stood up this dispatch box and said that would be telling a mistruth.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, of course, must solve the immediate problem of the accidental releases, which are a huge issue. But in terms of the longer-term planning, we have a very high vacancy rate within our prisons. I understand what the Secretary of State has said about the work that's gone into bringing this down, but will he look at the Justice Select Committee's recommendation to produce a 10-year plan for workforce for the prison system in the same way as we do for the NHS?
So, sir.
Very grateful to my honourable friend, and we are looking at that recommendation. There are significant workforce issues. We're asking our prison officers to work under a system that the prison inspector himself has said is cracking and is at breaking point, and we must invest in our workforce.
That's a man.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The day before Prime Minister's questions last week, we spent hours discussing the Public Office Accountability Bill. And I just wondered, bearing in mind there's such a crash in public trust and confidence, whether the
Lord Chancellor considered that it might have been better to have referred to the fact that he knew that there was a mistaken release of a prisoner in the offing. He might not have been able to give the details, but I think in order to restore public trust and confidence, and in light of the Public Office Accountability Bill, whether it might be better to have said something and to hold over that decision and say he would come back later to the House with more detail.
So stay.
Well, I recognise why the Honourable Lady, who's very reasonable, is making her comment in the way that she is. But I simply say that we inherited a system where 17 errors in release are made every single month. There is a data release every July. I've now updated the House with more information than the House has ever had about this issue. But I've also been clear, as any Justice Secretary would be, that we are not going to be able to eradicate human error and not going to be able to get back to historic levels quickly. But I put in place as much as I can to minimise the risk to the public.
Andrew Page.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member representing a prison constituency, I'd like to put on record my thanks to prison and probation staff who work hard under difficult circumstances. But in recognising that, I also know the pressure the prison system is under. It is shocking that a legacy of 14 years handed over to this government, a paper-based system and a prison system that was breaking. The party opposite likes to talk about a farce. If they want to talk about a farce, I will hand them a mirror to look into, because the only farce here is the breaking system. So can my honourable friend tell me what more we can do to support prison staff? Yes, there needs to be accountability, but we need to invest in technology, invest in solutions, and give our prisons the systems they need to stop these things happening in the future.
So stay.
Well, he's absolutely right. The best way to deal with this is to move to a system that's based on technology. To use the AI that's out there to properly compare records, whether they come from the court or whether they're from early release. That will take significant time, but I have found £10 million to at least begin that process, and that process begins as a result of these recent high-profile cases.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I tell the Right Honourable Gentleman that even the West Midlands Victims Commissioner, Natalie Kairosh, is herself living in fear due to the government's new release guidelines on open prisons. In 2016, she was stabbed in my constituency 24 times by her ex-partners. She was 8 months pregnant. Her attacker was jailed for 18 years, but is now moving to an open prison 4 years earlier than expected. And Natalie is terrified of coming face to face with him. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman explain why those convicted of domestic abuse who cannot apply for early parole under the SDS 40 process are not also excluded from the government's dangerous policy of moving offenders to open prisons?
So say.
Well, I know that the Victims Minister has met with her, and he will also know that in the sentencing bill we have restriction zones that can restrict the movement of those who have committed crimes like the one he refers to.
Blair Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a Wandsworth MP, my constituents are very concerned about these releases, and they have seen years of underfunding of Wandsworth Prison, but they've also seen more investment by this government since coming into power than for years and years before that. And I have every confidence from visiting the Wandsworth Prison about their new governance and the systems that are putting in place. I thank the Justice Minister for his response to my letter outlining the changes in training, technology and resources that are being put in place to redress these wrongs, and the digital rapid response unit. Could the Minister, just for the sake of my constituents, outline those stronger release checks that he has put in place straight away?
Justice Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend and for all of the work that she's doing in her community, and I recognise there will be anxiety in her constituency as a result of high-profile cases that have emanated from Wandsworth. She will know that one of those cases involved an error that actually started in the court system back in September before the checks that I have put in place. But when she asked me to outline what I've done, what it effectively means is that the duty governor, deputy governor are having a double look at what comes out of their OMUs, which are largely staffed by slightly more junior staff in relation who are making these decisions on who should be released from custody. But I look forward to visiting Wandsworth with her in the coming months.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Ministerial Code requires honesty and transparency, and on the 28th of October, I asked a written parliamentary question of how many of those released in error under this government remained at large. On the 3rd of November, I received an answer, Mr. Speaker, but it did not answer the question. Was that because they didn't know the answer of how many people were at large, or they chose not to be transparent and give the answer?
I explained at length in my statement who is at large. I have released data today outwith of the normal cycle of releasing in July, which was done under the last government. I have been as transparent with this House today on this issue than any minister has been. And I would remind the House, I checked the record, despite 860 releases in error under their watch, they never came to the House once.
Nope.
Not once on this issue. Not once.
Speaker, our constituents deserve a prison system they can have confidence in. And yet, prisoner releases in error increased every year since 2021. Despite that, there was no call for an investigation. There were no reforms. Can the Minister therefore please reassure my Carlisle constituents that it is this government that will implement the findings of Dame Limoin's investigation and restore the confidence that was eroded under the previous government?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right. Not once did they make a statement, even when William Fernandez was released in error under them and went on to commit an horrific crime. Not once did the minister come to the dispatch box. Not once did they release extra detail. And I've done that today.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A Torquay solicitor has recently told me of multiple occasions where there has been a lack of security staff to convey convicted criminals from Newton Abbot Magistrates Court to prison. This, on one occasion, one individual started self-harming. On another occasion, an individual waited and then left and absconded because they were locking up the building. He was then arrested at a later stage following a machete attack. How often is this happening across the United Kingdom, and what are you doing to stop this failure within the system?
Well, in a sense, he raises issues beyond the prison system, and he's right about the delivery mechanism of prisoners from court to prisons. He knows, because it's come up in oral questions again in the House, the issue that we inherited of backlogs from the party opposite. He knows also that we're demanding that our police arrest more and bear down on crime. So the criminal justice system is phenomenally hot. All of this will affect the prison system. That's why we've asked Brian Levinson to look at the issues of efficiency, particularly that relates to the court backlog. And part of that is that relationship between security and between the movement of people from our courts to our prison system.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I chaired the Public Accounts Committee, and when I was on it, so I served for over 10 years, we looked at and uncovered, with the help of the National Audit Office, failures in the probation service, which was a yo-yo policy between ministers as they changed, failure to build prisons, failure to maintain prisons, failure with the court IT system, and failure with identifying information that needed to be shared. Is he aware of the McGee Review, which was commissioned at the tail end of the last Labour government? And can he speculate why the McGee Review was never implemented over 14 years of a Conservative government?
Well, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for mentioning the McGee Review and their recommendations. And of course, I've asked my officials to look closely at the things that were recommended and do they pertain to the crisis that we've inherited today, and I'm grateful for her highlighting that issue. She will know that under the Conservatives, 24% cuts the prison service saw, and because of them, today over half of our frontline prison officers have less than 5 years experience. It's shocking. That's what we inherited.
So, Julian.
May I try and make a constructive suggestion to the Deputy Prime Minister? Has he considered that when somebody is due for release, they should be read a short statement saying that if they think they are being wrongly released, they should say so now, and if they do not do so, a further penalty of some sort will be imposed? Might not that act as a bit of a deterrent as well as a check?
Well, the honourable member makes a reasonable point, but the truth is that because of the complexity of the various early release schemes, the numerous guidance that exists, the many different thresholds, that often the prisoner himself is not completely aware of whether they should be released on Monday or whether they're released on Thursday. And sometimes it's possible that when a prisoner has been released in error, that it's by a matter of days. It's not a significant period. But I recognise why he says what he says. We do have to make sure that there's an obligation on the prisoner, and it is something that I will ask Lynn Owens to look closely at.
Alex Backett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Shadow Secretary of State in his remarks seems to have kicked off panto season, and his comments reminded me of my favourite character, Buttons, who longs to be Prince Charming. If only his colleagues would write into the 1920-22 committee so that he can formally start his leadership bid. But in the spirit of panto season, will the Deputy Prime Minister join me in reminding the Shadow Secretary of State that if he's looking for the reason why our prisons are in this state, they're behind him?
Well, he puts it beautifully, but I suspect it's why that the Shadow Justice Secretary said last week that the state of the prison service has been unacceptable for a very long time, including under the Conservative government. I suspect it's why William Hague, the former leader of the Conservative Party, said that the government failed to grasp either they didn't build more prisons, they didn't have enough people in our prisons, and this has been a long period of real failure.
But a message, Jackie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Between the 5th of July and the end of the reporting period in March, this government has overseen the accidental release of 193 prisoners. That's 5 prisoners every week. And we now know that there have been a further 91 accidental prison releases since the 1st of April, so 284 in total. So what assurances can the Secretary of State give my constituents that no prisoners have been accidentally released from HMP Littlehay in my constituency since Labour took office?
He knows that about 17 prisoners a day were released in errors under the last government. And he knows too that in introducing their early release scheme and our emergency early release scheme, there's complexity in the system. I will look closely at the data that is available in relation to his prison.
Catherine Fuchs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. Having spoken to my prison governor this weekend in Monmouthshire, I know the burden clerks and prison officers are under when they are calculating these sentences on paper. And the brass neck of the party opposite has got something to be believed. Their own party grandee, William Hague, said the Conservative government failed to grasp either that they had to build more prison places or they had to let people out. They didn't face up to either. Those are his words. So can the Secretary of State share with me how we are tackling both?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question. She's absolutely right. We've got to grip the system. I did that by chairing a performance board in the department yesterday. I've done that by asking Dame Lynn Owens to look at this closely. There does now need to be an urgent query process working between courts and prisons so that we aren't seeing those mistakes between the two systems. It will take digital technology, ultimately, I think, to fix this. but I've started that with 10 million to expand the digital rapid response unit so that we can at least start to flag in the system and across the system so that those working in our offender management units can spot where there might be an issue and there might be a problem. And I'm very pleased the sentencing bill that's now been through this House will simplify the system greatly because it's too complex at the moment.
Good job.
Speaker, Kabatu was released in error on the 24th of October, which is a Friday. I was under the impression that in the last Parliament, Simon Fell, the former member for Barrow, passed a rather brilliant private member's bill which became the Offenders Act 2023, which said that a prisoner cannot be released on a Friday without the Secretary of State say so, in order to reduce recidivism because people can't get access to the state for 72 hours. So has the Secretary of State devolved that to prison governors? And if they are being seen to be ignoring the will of this House, would he draw that power back up to himself?
So State.
Well, the Right Honourable Judge makes a very good point. The system had got to a place where prisoners weren't being released on Friday. That was relaxed, is my understanding, and I've asked Dame Linoes to look at that again.
Sir Rushford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the weekend, I was visited in my constituency surgery by one of the many hard-working prison officers from Durham, himself a victim of the chaos in the justice system that the previous government left behind. But before he left, he wanted me to know just how bad it is and why people are being released early. And as we all know, 800 were released early on their watch. So bad was the chaos that they created. He references that it's getting worse because of the chaos that they created. It got worse every year on their watch too. But would the Deputy Prime Minister give me the assurance, both for the victims of crime but also for our hard-working prison officers, that he will do what it takes to get to the bottom of this? And he's referenced the paper-based system without preempting Dame Owen's review. Will we be moving away from that 1980s paper-based system?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. He's right. 17 releases in error per month in 2024. And just in their last days in office, there was a step change in those releases in error. And it started very much going back to 2021 under their watch. But why did it start? Because of the complexity of the system and needing to introduce new mechanisms to get prisoners out because of an overheated prison place. We've got to be able to lock up the most violent people. That's why it's happened, and now, of course, we're going to do everything we can to get a grip.
I'll try and remember.
Speaker, it's good to see a quieter, more emollient, even by his own lights, humbler Secretary of State at the dispatch box today than the one we saw last week. Can the Justice Secretary say how many people have been wrongly detained? Yes. And how much money his department is setting aside for the likely ensuing litigation?
Secretary of State.
Well, he knows that we release those statistics on an annual basis, but I think behind his question that he knows just as the system releases prisoners in error, sometimes it also retains prisoners when they should be released. The two go hand in hand.
That's MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure as the Lord Chancellor made his statement, it will be victims that will be forefront of his mind. I think we can all only imagine the fear and distress that is caused to victims when someone who has caused them so much harm is released in error. So can the Secretary of State say in more detail and assure us that in those circumstances, victims and their families receive support and that they're fully informed about what is happening?
Secretary of State.
Well, she's right to put front and centre the victims and rightly the anxiety that they will be feeling. And it's right too, I've published more data today than has ever been before on this issue because I recognise the concern that there is in the public at this time. But it's also right that I leave and work with the police and our enforcement agencies on the publication of particular cases, because sometimes, either because victims have not been informed or it'd be dangerous to publish names, or indeed it might mean that the prisoner is able to know that he's being looked for and goes underground, or she's being looked for. For all of those reasons, we have to work with the police on these very sensitive issues in order to protect the public and absolutely to protect victims.
James Wyle.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Public safety should be the Justice Secretary's priority. So why did it take 6 days for the Metropolitan Police to be informed that a sex offender had been wrongly released from HMP Wandsworth?
Well, as I said, I've apologised from this dispatch box. Human error is in the system. There are delays, not just within our prisons, but also between different agencies, and that's why I've put in place the query system particularly.
Catherine Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government inherited a prison system which was so weakened by austerity, but it was also overcrowded by a justice system which failed to actually look at rehabilitation as well as punishment. Would the Secretary of State redouble the department's efforts to match employers who want to give prisoners a chance to learn skills and the habit of work with the opportunity to do so while serving their sentence and after, so that we're able to ensure that our communities are safer because we rehabilitate as well as punish?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, because she's emphasising punishment that works, and punishment that works has got to mean skills, education and employment, so that people don't go on to reoffend. And we've inherited a system where recidivism rates are beyond 60%, which means that the system isn't working, even though it's overheated. So these are issues that we have to look at in time. The sentencing bill is the beginning of the story, but we will have to return to these issues if we're serious about reducing reoffending.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recent events and today's court ruling bring to the surface again the anxiety of our Epping community. My thoughts, Mr. Speaker, remain with the victims, including the 14-year-old Epping schoolgirl. Appallingly, they and their families heard about this wrongful prisoner release from media instead of the government. It is frankly astonishing the government are only using their levers of power in the courts to overturn this case brought by the council, but are not using their powers to address the issues in the front line: the illegal immigration crisis, mistaken release of convicted prisoners, and serious management and safeguarding issues associated with the Bell Hotel, which needs to close urgently. When will the government get a grip, realise that they are not political commentators, but they are players on the pitch, and use their powers to tackle these issues once and for all?
Well, I recognise the sensitivity of this issue in his constituency, and I do recognise that many will have looked closely at that decision in the courts today. He knows that under the last government, £9 million a day being spent on housing people in hotels. He knows that the government is committed to a new programme, and we're looking, for example, at military bases to see where we can house. But he also knows that we have increased the amount of foreign nationals leaving this country and returning to the countries that they are from.
Paul Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to put on record my thanks to all the prison officer staff at Buckley Hall Prison in Rochdale, who've held the line in the face of impossible cuts and challenges over the last 14 years under the last government. It's hard to imagine the sheer distress that's caused to victims and their families whenever there is a release in error of any prisoner, as happened, as has been said, 800 times under the last government, without a single apology, without a single independent inquiry, without a single photo, without a single name that are being demanded by the shadow leader up on the other side. Does he agree that victims and their families should be put at the heart of our reforms when we're trying to make sure this never happens again?
He's absolutely right, and it's one of the reasons why I asked Dame Lynn Owens, as she looks at this issue, to meet with the victims, particularly of Kabatu's crime, and keep victims in mind. We do have to ensure, notwithstanding the errors that have been made, public confidence in the system. And it is important, of course, to assert once again from this dispatch box that 57,000 people are released from prisons every year. And the vast majority of those lead to no error at all.
Chris Spence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his statement today and the manner in which he has delivered it. The wrongful release of prisoners is of huge concern to my constituents in Harlow, and can I echo the comments made by colleagues across the House that ultimately the people that really suffer from this are the victims of those terrible crimes. Having previously worked for a homeless charity in Harlow, I saw a number of prisoners who were released on a Friday. They'd come to us on a Friday afternoon at about 5 o'clock with nowhere to go. Does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with me that actually when we release people from prison, we should make sure they have somewhere to go? And actually, if they have to declare where they're going to go after they're released, we may be able to avoid some of these mistakes.
And he's right that the Friday release issue, was often about public services not being available over the course of Friday evening into Saturday, and the homelessness problem that pertains to. And it's why I think it is important that we relook at what is happening in the system and the system that we inherited.
Alison Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 10th of October, Ola Abimbola, a violent Nigerian criminal, walked out of Ford Open Prison in my Bognor Regis and Littlehampton constituency. He hasn't been seen since. He's meant to be serving 21 years for GBH, kidnap, and possession of an offensive weapon. So I asked the Secretary of State, how many other prisoners are at large from Ford Open Prison, and what offences were they imprisoned for?
So State.
Well, the Honourable Lady will know that absconding is a serious criminal offence, that any defendant who commits this crime could face longer behind bars. It's a different issue, of course, to releases in error, because there have always existed Category D prisons and absconds. Those prisoners are assessed, but I want to assure her that actually when we look at the trend of those who are absconding, it is on a downward trend, with 57 in the year to March 2025.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Justice Secretary aware of any crimes committed by wrongly released prisoners whilst at large?
Well, as I've just said, under the last government, William Fernandez went on to commit an horrific crime. They never came to the dispatch box. By definition, if we got to a situation, and we did in 2024, where 17 releases in error were happening, of course it's possible that people can go on to commit crimes. That's why I'm hugely grateful, I know it's police resource, for the efforts of our police to rearrest these individuals, and some of them, as we saw last week, hand themselves back in when they realise that it has been committed in error. Our job is to minimise risk, but in a paper-based system we can never eradicate risk in time.
Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Justice Secretary said one of the prisoners accidentally released and still at large is a foreign national offender, and I know after PMQs last week he will be very well briefed this week. So can he say whether the prisoner was inside for aggravated burglary, drug offences, or failing to surrender to the police? And can he also say had this foreign national offender entered the country and whether he was an asylum seeker?
So State.
Well, I've made available as much detail as I can, given that normally this information is released in July. Case 2 was in prison for a Class B drug offence, and my understanding is, to the best of my knowledge, that that was the F&O prisoner, and I'm telling the honourable gentleman that, but I will have it double-checked because this information was made available to me very recently, and I will write to him if I make an error.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, I have 2 prisons, one at Wetherby, one at Wilston. I have 2 on the outside, one at Ascombe Grange, one at Fort Sutton. And they've heard the Secretary of State say that he has put in place some of the strongest measures ever there. The only question that my constituents want to answer to, Mr. Speaker, is when will they be able to say that they don't fear people being dangerous criminals being released onto the streets and terrorising their communities?
So State.
Well, I recognise the anxiety that this will have caused, and in a way this has been a revelation to the public that people are released in error from our system. And I'd want to emphasise that the vast majority of people are released in the correct manner, 57,000 released every year. But under successive governments for all of my lifetime, there have been releases in error. We want to bring that down to historic levels because it has been going up since 2021. But in a paper-based system, implemented often by junior staff, I cannot stand here and say we will eradicate it, but we will reduce it over the course of this Parliament.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week in Prime Minister's Questions, the Deputy Prime Minister said, quote, "Get a grip, man. I know I'm the Justice Secretary." Well, I'm pleased he knows he's the Justice Secretary, and with it comes leadership. So can he guarantee for the public going forward he has a grip on the issue of released prisoners by mistake?
So said.
Well, that's why I chaired a new performance board. That's why I've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look at this issue intensively. That's why I found 10 million for a digital rapid response unit. That's why, because there's this gap sometimes between our courts and our prisons, as has been referred to, I've put in place a new urgent query process. That's why we're taking through this House the sentencing bill, which will simplify release. All of those measures will begin to bear down on this issue, and I'm sure Dame Lynn Owens will come forward with more measures, and we will take them.
Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the summer recess, I had the pleasure to visit the Probation Centre in Dewsbury, where Lucy Nicholson, the head of the Probation Service, Kirklees Probation Delivery Unit, hosted me and her team. I want to pay tribute to their work, which is made extremely difficult, not just the Probation Service, but in prisons, by the lack of investment in this service by the previous government. We have accommodation that's full, a lack of funding, lack of resources and reduced staff, no processes in place to protect the public or the staff in the prisons, no systems and no checks and balances. Will the Secretary of State outline the timescales by which some and all of these issues will be addressed so that people in my constituency and across the country can feel safe when they sleep at night?
So state.
Well, I'm very grateful to him centering the importance of probation. It's why I visited the probation service in Islington as the first things that I did when I took office. It's why I was in Chatham, in Kent recently with probation officers. Investing in technology is hugely important to reduce their caseloads. Investing in more staff, hugely important, 1,000, more than 1,000 last year, 1,300 to come. It does need more resource, and that's why we've committed to 700 million by the next spending review. I'm sure we will return to these issues because I have no doubt about it. The decisions made by former Justice Secretary Chris Grayling were a travesty for probation and for criminal justice in our country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Justice Secretary tell this House whether in the last 16 months any prisoners have been accidentally released from Hill Grange prison in Worcestershire, and if so, how many?
So state.
As I said, I have released more data today than ever before. He knows that the data release is most often in July. I will look closely at his prison to see. But if 17 prisoners in 2024 were being released in error every month, then he will recognise that that will touch many of our prisons across the country. But he'll also recognise that there are differences in terms of the CAT and the category of prisoners, and particularly those that have a lot of churn and are letting people out on a more frequent basis than others.
Jack Wren.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Justice Secretary's team say that he found out about the accidental release of Algerian sex offender Kader Sharif on Tuesday evening. He contradicted them by saying he only learned on Wednesday morning. He said at PMQs that he'd been busy shopping for a suit that morning. Did the Lord Chancellor spend any time at all, shopping for a suit after he was told about that prisoner's release?
So state.
No.
Jim Chatham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for his answers? 321 violent or sexual offenders either failed to come back to jail after being temporarily freed, returned later, or breached the term of their licence last year, the highest number for years. Numbers were 177 4 years ago, 59 in 2014-2015. So again, I asked the Secretary of State this question: will the Secretary of State commit to the necessary changes, updating the data, updating the technology in the present system, and all other procedures that are necessary as a matter of public safety and public confidence? Thank you.
Well, he's right to put at the heart of his questions getting back to historic levels before we started to see the increase back in 2021. That is my intent, to get back to levels that are much, much lower than we're seeing now. I've set out the measures this afternoon that we're taking immediately. There will be more that follows Lynn Owens' review. But of course, this will take investment across the prison system.
That completes the statement. Point of order, Robert Jetman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at one point the Justice Secretary, in answer to questions, said that 17 prisoners were released in error a day under the last Conservative government.
That's what he said.
He then repeatedly said 17 prisoners a month were released in error by the last Conservative government. Neither of those things were correct. The actual figure, and 5 a month is 5 too many, was 5 a month. I know, Mr. Speaker, that the Justice Secretary would not want to appear as if he didn't know what he was talking about. Might you be able to get him to correct the record for us?
I think, in fairness, that I don't want to continue the debate, and that's what we're in danger of doing. I recognise there was a mistake made. I accepted it was a mistake that was made. And therefore, I think you have corrected the record. I think we'll leave it. Unless the Justice Secretary wishes to come back, of course.